I am 87 years old. In the last 3 years, I have lost 14 kilos of weight I was told was permanent, added 4 kilos of lean muscle to my frame, and restored my bone density to a level my doctor called defiant of my decade. I am physically stronger today than I was at 60. We are conditioned to believe that aging is a slow surrender, that we must eventually fold ourselves into the furniture and wait for the world to move on without us. I spent years believing my armchair was a sanctuary, but I was wrong. It was a cage. I discovered a truth through my own struggle. Your body doesn't collapse because of the clock. It collapses because you stopped claiming your space. I was a ghost in my own skin, until I decided that the soreness of effort was a small price to pay for the dignity of standing tall. I am not here to offer you a miracle or a shortcut. I am here for those who refuse to be written off. If you feel the world starting to look past you, stay with me. Your presence here is what gives this journey meaning. Join this community of people who chose to remain visible, and leave a comment just to say you are still here. Let us choose not to disappear. The sound. It's the sound I remember most. That high-pitched, delicate clink of a silver spoon hitting the side of a bone china cup. My daughter Sarah was stirring her tea. She was sitting right across from me at the Sunday dinner table, but she wasn't looking at me. None of them were. They were talking about the arrangements. That's a heavy word, isn't it? Arrangements. It's the word you use for flowers at a funeral or a complicated travel itinerary. But they were using it for me. They were discussing whether the hallway in my little cottage was wide enough for a walker, or if the stairs were finally becoming an issue. I sat there, 84 years old, weighing 78 kilograms of what felt like dead weight, and I watched the steam rise from a plate of roast beef I didn't have the strength to chew. I felt like a ghost, a fragile porcelain ornament they were all terrified of breaking, so they decided the best thing to do was to stop touching it altogether. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I was still in here. But my voice, it felt small, brittle, so I just reached for my tea. And then the tremor happened. Just a slight shake, a rhythmic, mocking wobble in my hand. The tea slopped over the rim, staining the white lace tablecloth a dull, permanent brown. I saw Sarah's eyes flicker toward my hand, just for a second, before she looked away and kept talking about assisted living facilities. She didn't even mention the spill. That was the worst part. They had stopped expecting me to be capable. I had surrendered. I just hadn't signed the papers yet. You don't wake up one morning and decide to give up. It's a slow leak. It's the way you start to navigate your own living room like it's a minefield. For me, it was the armchair, a big floral wingback that had been my husband's favourite. By the time I was 84, that chair had become my entire world. I spent maybe 22 hours a day in it, or in the bed 10 feet away from it. Have you ever felt the gravity of a piece of furniture? To get out of that chair, I had to do this humiliating dance. I'd have to rock my body forward, 1, 2, and on the third rock, I'd use every ounce of momentum to heave myself upward, my joints groaning louder than the springs in the cushion. The moment I got upright, that sharp, hot needle of pain would shoot through my lower back, right at the base of my spine. It was a reminder. Stay down, the pain said. The world is for people who can move. You're just a spectator now. So I stayed down,
I accepted the beige years. Everything in my life had turned beige. My walls, my nightgown, my thoughts, even my food.
I looked in my pantry one afternoon. I remember the light was particularly grey that day, and all I saw was white bread, crackers, and tea bags. The elderly diet. It's what you eat when you've stopped cooking for a family and started just refueling a dying engine. I lived on tea and toast. No protein, no colour, no life. I wasn't eating to live. I was just keeping my stomach from growling until I could justify going back to sleep. I hadn't touched a piece of fresh fruit or a real piece of chicken in 4 days. Why bother? Boiling an egg felt like a marathon. Washing a pan felt like a chore I didn't have the breath for. I had become a ghost in my own skin. I looked at my arms, and the skin was like tissue paper, hanging off bone that felt like it was turning to chalk. I had lost the structure of myself. I was evaporating. I remember sitting there after they all left that Sunday, looking at the stain on the tablecloth. I thought, this is it. This is the rest of it. I will sit in this floral chair until I become part of the pattern. I will wait for the next arrangement to be made. I accepted it. I really did. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the house wrap around me like a shroud. But then... A few days later, I was looking for a stamp in the kitchen drawer. I found an old Polaroid instead. It was tucked way in the back, behind the spare keys and the twine. It was a picture of me from maybe 30 years ago. I was in the garden. I was holding a heavy bag of mulch in one hand and a trowel in the other, and I was laughing. My back was straight, my shoulders were square. I looked at that woman, and then I looked down at my hands, those shaking beige hands. And for the first time in a decade, I felt a tiny, cold spark of something that wasn't surrender. It wasn't hope. Not yet. It was something sharper. Something that felt like a question I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. I looked at the stairs, just looked at them, and I wondered, just for a second, if the ghost was still haunted by the person she used to be. I didn't move that day. I just sat there, staring at those stairs like they were a mountain range I'd forgotten I was supposed to climb. That tiny spark I felt, that cold, sharp question, it didn't go away. It followed me into the next week, itching under my skin like a wool sweater you can't take off. It finally came to a head on a Tuesday. I was at the back of the local pharmacy, waiting for my blood pressure medication. I have 5 different bottles now, a little plastic symphony of staying alive that usually just reminds me I'm failing. The air in there always smells like floor wax and peppermint, and the lights, they have that harsh blue-white flicker that makes everyone look a bit like they've been underwater too long. I happened to look up, and there it was. One of those convex security mirrors tucked into the corner of the ceiling. You know the ones. They make everything look slightly distorted, like a fisheye lens. I saw a figure in a grey cardigan standing near the vitamin aisle. I actually looked around to see who the poor soul was, wondering why they were standing so strangely. Then it hit me. That wasn't someone else. That was me. In that curved glass, I saw a silhouette that didn't look like a human being with a spine. It looked like a collapse. I was stooped so far forward that my neck had a permanent 15-degree slouch, like I was permanently searching the floor for something I'd dropped years ago and given up on finding. I wasn't aging in that mirror. I was evaporating. My frame was folding in on itself, shrinking away from the world. I looked at that stooped, grey-clad ghost, and I felt a physical wave of nausea. I didn't recognize the woman I had allowed myself to become.
A few days later, my grandson Leo came over. He's a sweet boy, always showing me things on that glowing phone of his.
He wanted to show me a picture from our visit to the Botanical Gardens last month. I remember it being a nice day, but when he swiped to the photo, I stopped breathing for a second. There I was, slumped in a green folding chair. My clothes, they didn't look like they were covering a body. They looked like a pile of laundry that someone had just tossed onto the seat and forgotten to fold. There was no structure, no strength. I realized right then that I'd lost at least 5 kilograms of muscle in the last 2 years alone. Just let it wither away, replaced by a softness that felt like a betrayal of every mile I'd ever walked in my life. I looked at my legs in that photo, and they looked like 2 pieces of string. I felt a flash of something I hadn't felt in decades. It wasn't sadness. It was disgust. Pure, unfiltered disgust at my own surrender. I realized that if I didn't start claiming my bones back, piece by piece, there wouldn't be anything left of me to bury but a memory and a few bottles of pills. The next morning the house was quiet. The sun was just hitting the kitchen floor, showing every bit of dust. I stood at the front door and looked at my mahogany cane. It was leaning there, polished and faithful, my 3rd leg for the last 3 years. I didn't touch it. I opened the door and looked down the driveway. It's not a long driveway, maybe 40 meters of gravel and some stubborn weeds. To a normal person, it's a 30-second stroll to get the mail. To me, looking at it without my cane, it looked like the Sahara Desert. I took the first step. The wind caught my cardigan, and for a second I felt utterly exposed, like I was naked in the middle of the street. My left ankle gave a terrifying little wobble the moment it hit the uneven gravel. My heart started hammering against my ribs. I could feel it in my throat, a frantic, thumping rhythm. I looked at my watch. 110 beats a minute, just from the sheer terror of standing on my own 2 feet. I didn't stop. I walked to the end of that gravel, one agonizing, shaky step at a time. I reached the mailbox, touched the cold metal, and turned around. By the time I got back to the front door, my legs were shaking so hard I thought they'd snap like dry kindling. 40 meters. It took me 6 minutes. 6 minutes to walk the length of a driveway. I came inside and leaned my back against the closed door, gasping for air as if I'd run a marathon. My heart was still racing and my lower back was screaming at me. But for the first time in 10 years, the pain didn't tell me to sit down. It told me I was still alive. I didn't go back to the wingback chair. I stayed right there, leaning against the door, staring at the kitchen island. I had realized something. The world expected me to disappear. My family expected me to break. My own body was trying to fold itself into the earth. But as I stood there, breathless and trembling, I realized that the only person who had actually signed the surrender papers was me. And I hadn't even used a pen. I'd used a tea bag and a piece of toast. I looked at the kitchen clock. The silence of the house didn't feel like a shroud anymore. It felt like a starting gun. I haven't moved yet. I'm still leaning against the door. But for the first time in a long, long time, I'm not looking for a place to sit down. I'm looking for a way to stay standing. The morning after that first walk to the mailbox, I woke up feeling like my body had been dismantled and put back together by someone who didn't have the instructions. Everything ached. Not that sharp, terrifying pain of an injury, but a deep, heavy soreness that felt like it was coming from inside my very bones. The old Brittany, the one who had spent 3 years blending into the fabric of that floral armchair. She was whispering in my ear. "Just sit down, love. You tried. You did your 40 meters. That's enough for a woman your age." I didn't sit down, but I didn't go outside either. I was too embarrassed, you see. I didn't want the neighbours to see me struggling. I didn't want them to watch me wobble on the gravel like a newborn foal. So I stayed in the kitchen. I looked at that granite island in the centre of the room. It's about 3 meters long, and I started to walk. Slap, slap, slap. That was the sound of my house slippers on the linoleum. It was the most pathetic sound I'd ever heard. I felt like a caged bird pacing a tiny wire floor, but I counted every turn. 10 laps. 20. By the time I hit 50, I was gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles were white, just to keep my balance. I felt ridiculous. I'm a grown woman, a retired administrator, and here I was doing laps around a toaster. But when I finished, I didn't reach for the bread box. I cracked 2 eggs into a pan. I added a handful of spinach that I had to force myself to chew because my jaw wasn't used to working that hard. No toast, no jam, just real food. It tasted like effort. Then came the soup cans. Tomato soup, 400 grams apiece. You wouldn't think something that small could be heavy, would you? I found them in the back of the pantry, dusty and forgotten. I sat on a straight-backed chair, not the armchair, never the armchair, and I lifted them. Over my head. 1, 2. By the 7th repetition, my shoulders were on fire. I remember staring at the red and white label and thinking about how I used to carry my grandsons, 15 kilograms of wiggling boy on each hip without even breaking a sweat. Now, 400 grams of soup felt like a mountain. I did 3 sets of 10. I did them 5 days a week, right through the evening news. I did them when I was tired. I did them when I was bored. And God, was I bored. That's the part they don't put in the magazines, isn't it? The sheer, grinding boredom of it all. There were no miracle weeks. There was no morning where I woke up and suddenly felt 20 years younger. It was just Tuesday. And then it was Wednesday. For months the scale didn't move. I was still 78 kilograms of soft edges and stooped shoulders. The rain would lash against the kitchen window for a week straight, and I'd just keep pacing that island. Slap, slap, slap. I wanted to quit every single day of month 3. I missed the white toast. I missed the way the tea and the crackers made me feel full and sleepy, instead of this constant nagging hunger for something real. I felt like I was working for a boss who never paid me. But I stayed the course. Not because I was brave, but because I was stubborn. I had decided that if I was going to evaporate, I was going to do it on my feet. Then something happened. It was around day 180. I was coming back from the mailbox. I was doing that walk every morning now, without the cane and without the fear. I reached the front porch. We have 3 concrete steps leading to the door. For years those steps had been my enemies. I'd have to stop, reach for the iron railing, and haul myself up 1 foot at a time, gasping by the time I hit the mat. I had 2 bags of groceries in my arms. Real food, chicken, broccoli, a carton of eggs. I didn't even think about it. I just stepped up. Right foot, left foot, right foot. I was in the hallway before I realized what had happened. I hadn't reached for the railing. I hadn't hesitated. I hadn't felt that sharp, hot needle in my lower back. I stood there in the quiet of my house, the grocery bags heavy in my hands. and I realized my spine felt different. It felt like a column of wood instead of a stack of wet cardboard. I put the bags on the counter and walked over to the hallway mirror. I didn't look like an athlete. I still had the wrinkles and the grey hair. But the slouch? It was smaller. I was standing maybe 2 inches taller, just because my muscles were finally deciding to hold my bones where they belonged. I looked at the floral armchair in the living room. It looked smaller too. Less like a sanctuary and more like a trap I'd managed to step out of. I didn't sit down to celebrate. I just started unpacking the chicken. I had a long way to go, I knew that. But for the first time in a decade, the door to the world didn't look like it was locked from the outside. It was sitting there, just a tiny bit ajar, and I could finally feel the draft. It happened again this morning. I was standing in front of the hallway mirror, the same one where I used to see a ghost. I wasn't looking for a slouch or a tremor this time. I was just looking. I noticed the light catching the side of my neck, and I saw a cord of muscle there that hadn't been visible since the 80s. It's strange, isn't it? At 87, you don't expect to find new parts of yourself. You expect to keep losing them. But I've stopped losing. I went to my closet and pulled out a pair of trousers I'd pushed to the very back years ago. They used to be tight, the kind of tight that makes you hold your breath just to sit down. Now they were sliding off my hips. I had to go find my old leather belt, the one with the brass buckle. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the notches. I had to take a pair of heavy scissors and punch a new hole, 5 centimeters past the original one. As the leather resisted the blade, I smelled that deep, earthy scent, and I realized something. I wasn't just losing weight. I was carving a person out of the fog. I'm 64 kilograms now. When I started this, when I was sitting in that floral chair waiting for the end, I was 78. But those 14 kilograms aren't the real story. The real story is the 4 kilograms of muscle I've put back on these old bones. My doctor, he actually took off his glasses and leaned in when he saw my last scan. He told me my bone density had stabilized. He used a funny word. He said it was defiant. He said for a woman in her 9th decade, I was breaking the rules of biology. I told him I wasn't breaking rules. I was just finally following them. I think about that every time I get on the city bus now. I was with my daughter Sarah last Thursday. She's 60 now, and she has that look people get, that senior look where the world starts to treat you like you're made of glass. The bus was crowded, swaying and groaning as it navigated the midday traffic. A young man, maybe 20, looked up and immediately stood to offer his seat. But he didn't offer it to me. He offered it to Sarah. He looked right past me. Not because I was invisible like I used to be, but because he saw a woman standing there with her feet planted, her hand gripped firmly on the overhead rail, absorbing the vibration of the engine through the soles of her shoes, without a single wobble. He saw a person who was stable. I stayed standing for the whole 15-minute ride. I watched the houses go by, and I felt my quadriceps engaging with every turn. My spine felt like a column of tempered iron. I didn't feel vanity. I didn't feel like I'd won a race. I just felt present. I was no longer the arrangement being discussed at the dinner table. I was the most disciplined person on that bus. I've lost the shame. That's the biggest thing. I lost the resignation that says, this is just how it is when you're old. I lost the belief that my only job was to stay out of the way until I disappeared.
I'm 87 years old.
I walk 4 kilometers every single morning before the sun is even fully up. I eat greens and protein at every meal because my body is a machine that requires good fuel, not just tea and toast. I still lift those soup cans, though they feel light as feathers now. I am the strongest version of Brittany that has ever walked this earth. And I had to wait until my 87th year to meet her. I know where you're sitting. I know the weight of that chair. I know the way the silence in your house can feel like it's pressing down on your shoulders, telling you to just stay still. I know the fear of that first step on the gravel. I'm not going to tell you it's easy. I'm not going to tell you it's quick. It took me 500 days of walking in circles around my kitchen island just to feel like a human being again. There are no miracles here. There is only the clock, and the food you choose to put in your mouth, and the decision to stand up one more time than you sit down. I see you. I was you. That is all I know.